This is Lyle, and I'm hosting yet again for Sinister Pod. This is episode 2, and today we're talking to one of our writers, Kirsten L. Rasmus. I get it right. Yeah, Kirsten L. Rasmussen, who has been writing for our anthologies, well, since the first one, right?
Yeah, I've been there since Halloween, and then we were both in
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Ghostwriters, so it's been it's been 2 years,
Two
hasn't it?
years? I think it's been 1 year. I think when I joined, it was right when um, Ghostwriters was changing to Sinister Society, and
Yeah.
um,
Okay.
yeah, it was a fun fact actually. The first thing that I submitted was an early draft of what I just submitted for the Nevermore Nights anthology, the Raven anthology, which is out now, by the
That's
way. So you can buy
awesome.
that as well. But we're not really
Yeah.
here to talk about that book. We're here to talk about Kirsten's new book, Blood Mist and Bonedust. So um, yeah, why not tell
Yes.
us a bit about that book?
So, Blood Mist and Bonedust started probably about 16 years ago when I had a deep, and still do, deep obsession with My Chemical Romance, the band, who is now alive and well and has blown up all over the internet. But back in 2008, I had, this ongoing, story in my head of this girl in trouble. And all I had was a flash image of her running away from her family, and the
Mm.
grandpa was bad. That's all I had. That's all the information I had. And I tucked that in a notebook somewhere, and I was like, I'm gonna use this one day. And then one day it popped up about a year ago, when I was having a discussion with another bookseller of mine, or because I also work at Barnes and Noble here in Chandler, Arizona, and we were talking about the whole entire, how my
Mm.
9/11 caused 50 Shades of Grey.
You're gonna have to elaborate
And
that
I'm
on
just
that a
like,
bit. How did
we got
one lead to
into,
the other there?
all right. So there's this whole entire meme about pretty much how 9/11 caused My Chemical Romance because Gerard Way was on the ferry on the way from Jersey, and he saw the towers go down, and it was that moment he said, I want to quit art school, I'm going to start a band. And so My Chemical Romance was born. Well, then after My Chemical Romance was born in about 2000, 2002, Stephanie Meyer then wrote Twilight, which was supposedly a commentary on
Hmm.
My Chemical Romance, or inspired by My Chemical Romance. Um, and then eventually that went on to Fifty Shades of
All
Grey, which
right,
was a
of
fan
course, yeah.
fiction of Twilight originally. And then yeah, so it's been a snowball effect, and so my thing is, I wouldn't have gotten My Chemical Romance from Twilight. Like, maybe the song Vampires Will Never Hurt You, that was the vibe I got, maybe. But I would not say that Twilight was a My Chemical Romance inspired romance. And I'm like, you want to see a My Chemical Romance inspired romance? Here you go.
Oh wow, that's actually really funny because I had a question about Twilight that I was going to ask you
Yes,
later on, but it's still, maybe we'll get to it eventually, but I think it's still kind of relevant to what you were talking about.
I think it is too. Like, Twilight, no matter what your critiques of it, is always gonna be timeless because that's what our generation had as vampires.
Oh,
And
totally, yeah.
it's one of those stories that I think is, you know, it's all of our guilty pleasures. We all like
Mm.
watching it,
As as funny you
even
should.
if we say we don't. We do.
That's the thing. That's the thing. I mean, I think back in the day, I was a bit of a Twilight hater, and I was kind of like, oh, it sucks. And then I did kind of have a moment where I was like, wait, why do I hate this so much? Like,
Yeah,
is it because someone else has told me to? And I think it was kind of partly
exactly.
that, you know.
It's funny how we go through phases, and it's funny. I've thought about doing a paper comparing Twilight and 50 Shades of Grey,
Mm.
and I think I would definitely make the argument of 50 Shades of Grey being a better love story than Twilight because there was actually change that and growth in that relationship.
Oh, right, right.
But anyways, so Blood Mist and Bonedust is definitely a gothic romance. It is a um, it's kind of a Bluebeard story. In my thought process too. It's kind of a reflection of how women see themselves in today's society, especially young girls, and the mentalities are out about where women fit in life now. And I it's something I've kind of been observing, in just my own life and how I've grown up and you know, thought process I've changed about my own, sexuality and where I stand with my family and there's a lot of layers to it as far as, this book also explores family loyalty and how far that goes and just the characters go through some real terrible things, but I think
Well, they've already, like, I started reading it. There's already been some pretty terrible things that have happened to the characters. Like even before the story starts, even in the prologue and the sort of splitting apart of that family. Um, um, Minerva's gonna get us a lot more views.
Minerva's
By the way,
determined to be a part of it.
I'm gonna make sure to use this clip in the shorts reel. So you say you've been writing Blood Mist for 16 years. That's a long time. Like, so when you say that, do you mean that
It,
you've sort of had the idea, and
I had the
mm,
idea, and I probably didn't write it until like a year
right,
ago. So it's been
right,
cooking. Yeah. So I started writing probably about exactly a year ago
mm,
this month, and the goal is to have it out in a year.
damn.
So it's 95,000 words and 300
Hmm.
and something pages that Marie likes to remind me of.
You're making me feel bad now. Like I've got a big sort of like project that I've been working on since I was in my early 20s, and I keep deciding that I hate it, and then deciding, oh, I should finish it, and like back and forth, back and forth. That's only 300 pages long, and you've done this in a year and got me beat by like 50 or so pages. So, um,
It it's it takes a lot of dedication.
mm,
Minerva very much
oh
wants to
yeah.
be a part of this.
What do you think, Minerva?
But yeah, it's this I can definitely say when it comes to pacing and ideas like that, always hold on to ideas because you never
Mm.
know when the moment's going to strike. Obviously, I waited 16 years. So 14-year-old me was like, yes, this is important, and I'm glad. I think that's one thing. Even if you take it out and hate it, always keep it because you never know what you're going to need it. Because on chapter 3, I wrote where you kind of get to see how Serlanos and Lumen interact and what that world is like. I wrote
Mm.
that back when I was in college. And so, like, the writing of this story has been sporadic. And, yeah, one thing I've learned from Stephen King is, that an idea or a book is not going to just plop in your lap or, it's going to
Yeah.
come in stages. And, or at random moments, you'll get an idea and it might not fit that story or it might, fit some other
Right.
story that you haven't even created yet. And so when I get these scenes, it kind of never comes in order and it's never going to be gifted to you like, here's for this book, use this, um and that was something I kind of had to do was like, okay, is this book 1 or book 2? And as soon as I said that, I'm like, oh crap, I'm doing another book for this. So it's like now there's gonna be 3 books in the series, so it's a trilogy.
Yeah, why not? Why not? Tell us a little bit about these characters, Lewin and Lenora. They're both quite tragic characters. I think like they're both going through, they're both going through some shit. I think Lenora, when we meet her, is instantly sympathetic. We were talking a bit before the call about Grimm's Brothers fairy tales and
Yes.
Hansel and Gretel, and I kind of feel like there's an element of that to her character. She's a kind of she's got this tragic childhood. She's got her brother that loves her and is looking out for her, but the adults aren't looking out to her, and they're sort of like selling her off into this. It's sort of like, unlike maybe Hans Christian Andersen or Brothers Grimm. You explicitly sort of say this is going to be criminal activity, most likely prostitution that she is being like sold into.
Yeah.
And Lewin as well, he's like, obviously, he's the character who's the vampire. He's seen a lot of stuff. He's quite sort of troubled. um, yeah, like what sort of insight, what's your sort of interpretation of those characters as the author?
Lenore is definitely, I think, in some ways based off of the kind of, damsel distress, femme fatale, but, also has a dash of, save yourself, like
Sure.
the no one's gonna save you except for yourself, type of mentality. Um, and she grew up in, upper, uh, upper Chicago, comes from a nice family, and went through pretty much her whole entire life unaware that this was really happening. It was kind of up to the adults to, solve this problem in her life until it became her and her brothers. Um, and I think it's definitely a reflection, of how, like, parental choices, will affect, people a lot, way down the line. We don't know what those choices are. They might be made in a split second, because they had to. So I think, a lot of Lenora is doing with those choices and finally realizing that she can make choices herself, because for the longest time she wasn't able to. Um, and so this is kind of, in a way of a coming age story too, where she kind of is like, all right, there's no one else in this world but me. And, you kind of make your own family. And then Lewin's kind of the, not exactly polar opposite of that, but his story is a little bit darker. The fact that he was brought into the vampire world against his will. He was a soldier coming back from World War, where he, ended up in a bar after finding out that his sweetheart had gotten married while he was gone, and that's where he meets Cernunnos and Callum, who had already been doing this for a couple hundred years. Uh, or not shorter. So they run into each other, and that's where Cernunnos is like, I need someone who's dispensable and has training, and he found Lewin, and Lewin was kind of ripped away from his normal life and thrust into this other world of guns, blood, and gore. So it. And I think when Lauren and Lenora find each other, it's definitely explosion, because they've never been given the opportunity to be themselves, make their own choices, and be in a space where someone else will allow that and that growth. So I think
As
it's definitely a interesting connection that you don't really see in these days.
as there was so when I was reading the chapters with Lewin, I maybe it's the kind of vampire connection, but I got a kind of impression of Spike from Buffy, maybe.
Yes.
Like this kind of like there's something that in some of the dialogue between him and Solano, that's the crime boss, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that he Solano will ask him to do, to do a hit, to do, to commit some terrible crime, and Lewin will kind of be like, "What? I'm not happy about that. I'll go do it anyway, though." Like he's kind of got this kind of like, sort of dual nature where it's sort of like he knows that some of what he's being asked to do is wrong, but at the same time he's so sort of like jaded that he's just kind of like,
It doesn't, killing people didn't really matter much to him, because he's been doing that since before he was a vampire. He
mm-mm,
killed a bunch of people in war, and he, and I think the thing I like about Lewin is when he starts, Lewin's is still battling with his own immortality versus mortality, and
mm,
you can see that and how he just, doesn't, he's not really sure what side he fits on most.
sure, yeah.
Yeah.
A sort of like morally
Oh.
grey kind of character.
Yeah, he's very much a double agent in some sense.
Right, right, okay, cool.
So,
So, at the beginning we were talking about Mycam and
yeah.
the obviously the role of their music, and music in general plays a big role in this book, like from the
Yes.
chapter titles have references to My Chemical Romance songs in them. Like, so you mentioned earlier as well that this story is like a vampire slash crime mafia story
Yeah.
that is more suited to a kind of vampire romance inspired by My Chemical Romance than Twilight was. I mean, what are the elements
Yes.
of Blood Mist that you think make that so?
Well, if you go back and see Three Cheers for Sweet Revenge, which was My Chemical
Oh,
Romance's
that's
second
my
album,
favorite.
was very
That's my
much,
favorite album too.
yeah.
It's way better than the Black Parade, isn't it? I,
Yeah, life and the
I
murder.
think.
I wanted to kind of capture the life and the murder scene type,
Mm,
and that's pretty much Lewin's life. He's like he's always on a murder scene of some sort.
yeah.
There's dead bodies everywhere. There's just, he, and this is just normal for him. And I think that was kind of the idea of that Gerard Way kind of conceived, was like just blood everywhere.
Mm,
And gunfights, and because uh Gerard Way and the bandmates all grew up in New Jersey, where there's still a lot of crime, and they didn't go out and play. They stayed inside and read comic books, and which is pretty much what I did. And so
mm,
I think that was a big factor in the fact that I wanted to capture that, always on the murder scene, always, on the run, gunshots, there's a lot of action in this book, which I was happy
mm-hmm.
to kind of do a good balance of, romance and action and plot, because you don't want more of one or the other. And um
Right.
that was kind of I didn't want to go full on mafia, but leave subtle hints that this was what was left after all the original dons and everyone had been cleared out, because now a lot of crime is done online with human trafficking and drugs. It's very under the radar, which I think made this quite easy for me now, you know, to do. Um,
Mm.
so that was the element I guess I wanted to pull from My Chemical Romance, is the blood and the horror and the inspiration that life is a murder scene, especially for these characters.
Yeah. There's a song on that album called "You Know What They Do to Guys Like Us in Prison,"
Yes.
which I really love that song, and I really love the kind of image of, like, when you look at a band picture of My Chemical Romance, they're these kind of, like, vampire boys, like these like with these emo haircuts, and it's kind of like when you read that title, you kind of imagine them, I don't know, standing in the middle of some
Yeah.
crime they've committed or something, like thinking about, oh god, like, it's sort of like,
And I use that scene and that song, I think, really well.
yes, yeah, yeah. I was gonna say, yeah. There's a reason why I talked about that one
Yeah,
specifically.
it's
Um,
that was definitely the contender part, because of Lenora walking out of one nightmare and into one that she
mm,
could have not ever imagined before, and then that's when the
mm.
situation, I think, gets real. That's when she's like, oh,
Right.
okay, this is what we're doing now.
Okay. Yeah. It's sort of like a fish out of water, like an extreme, like fish out of water kind of thing.
Yes.
Um,
And I actually drew a
so,
scene for that
oh yeah.
for that moment in which she, realizes, this is who I'm with now, and
Kirsten is an incredible artist, by the way, as well. So go check her art out on
so that was a scene.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah, so I wanted to
Oh,
capture
that's
that
so
that
cool.
you know first scene where they officially meet, and so all of this art will be
That's
online as
so
well for
cool. I
viewing.
love the colors there.
Yeah, the blue and the red. So this was a lot of fun to
Hmm.
create. Um, and just
Totally.
I had fun in this world, and then there's more lore, there's more gore and smut, all the smut.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's something that, like, I'm only not talking about that because I haven't got to it in
Yes,
the
I won't ruin that for you.
in the book yet, but I'm sure that's, obviously that is an element of the book.
Yes, I know.
So which you can talk about if you want. I mean,
I think the smut is always it's hard to write and talk about. Uh,
yeah, that's fair enough. Well, let's move on then. Let's move
yes.
on. Let's just like leave that for the reader
Yeah,
to
it's something that
enjoy
just
when
needs
they
to be read at
discover it.
that point. You know, there's not really talking about it. It happens. Uh,
Yep.
more often than I
Sure,
expected.
sure,
I
sure.
think I only expected to have like maybe two sex scenes in there. I'm sorry, they're littered everywhere.
Yeah, why not? Why not more?
I even had a moment in which like the characters were supposed to be doing something completely relevant to the plot, and they get completely distracted. I'm just like, okay, this is where it's going. You guys keep getting distracted.
That's you know what? That happens. That happens in, I'm sure that would happen if there were vampires and, intertwined with like crime bosses IRL.
Exactly.
So the when I when I first learned about Blood Mist and Bonedust, it was that sort of pitch line that of vampires meets mafia crime families,
Hmm.
and that immediately was that had immediate appeal, and I was sort of like, yeah, I want to read more of that, and yeah, what is it that you think makes those two genres such a good pairing for each other?
Um, with the mafia, so mafia is always about flashing, everything that they had, because they stole a lot. They would, you know, go on runs, run runners and everything. They lived the high life and loved that being on top of the world, and everyone could see them and they could get away with anything. Especially Capone. Capone was a very big inspiration to this because he was,
Hmm.
the big bad of Chicago. Um, and if you got too big for your britches, they would take you down. You wanted to make a big enough splash where people would notice you, but not enough that you're going to be a problem. And that's where vampires kind of come in, is that vampires very much like running underneath the radar, but they love the high life. They love, just pretty much anything cultural and shiny, and, money and power kind of fall hand in hand with that,
Hmm.
especially in this day and age. And I wanted to kind of create that same system, but, more elevated and more curtailed to how a vampire would be. So I've pretty much had to create this whole entire underground system that, had historical links and would make sense for a vampire to use. And so there's like miles and miles of underground tunnels that are not being used in Chicago anymore. Which I'm like, well, that's perfect for a
Mm,
vampire. Uh,
of course, yeah.
and a lot of research went into this book. At one point, I think I had the screen and the cards on the wall, and I was starting to look a little insane. Um, but it was definitely one of
I
those
think.
worlds that blended really well together because of what both parties wanted. Um,
Mhm.
Secrecy, success, and, everything that they could ever want, right there in front of
Sure.
them.
That
And
kind of like excess and debauchery and
yes, and
that kind of thing.
no consequences, like, because they are not being held accountable, like, even though like the commissioner tries, like, he's also in their pocket, so he can't really whistle
Hmm.
blow on them, otherwise he's gonna be dead. uh
Yeah.
so there's a lot of moving factors, like everyone's like, I might get killed for this, and that was how
Mm.
it was. You never knew if the next time you saw your buddy in the mafia, if it was for, coffee or for a shootout. So because
Yeah.
he wanted to take over your position, then there was no, and you had to get the permission from the Don to do it. And so
Of
it was
course. Yeah.
a lot of different moving, everyone making a decision based on one person. And I think what I did with Cyrillnos, that Cyrillnos not really clear of what he wants. And you're not, yeah, blood. That's what every vampire wants, but it's like, all right, they're going through a lot of trouble to get all this blood from blood banks, and um but the men aren't being paid. Someone else is not following up on promises, and it's kind of like, what is this guy's actual goal? He's after this mortal girl when most vampires don't take mortal wives. So you're
Mhm.
like, what is he doing up here? So it's not exactly clear what he's doing, but people are following his orders.
Sure. Yeah.
And I think that was the illusion that a lot of people don't know with Dawn's, like, what their angle was. And there's only so much you can have in the world before there's no much more to take.
Hmm. That's a really interesting take on it. I mean, because I'm just sort of thinking of uh, movies that I've liked. I'm thinking of movies rather than books. I know some people who are probably listening to this are probably like, I don't know, screaming good vampire books they've read that involve like sort of underground subcultures and stuff. But in movies like Blade and the Underworld movies,
Yeah.
there's always a kind of hint of the vampires sort of um, ingrained in the kind of underground culture in like the sort of in this kind of like goth nightclub kind of culture, but it's never. I always kind of felt like it wasn't explored enough.
Yeah.
Like, it's just it kind of went as far as goths sometimes sorry, vampires sometimes hang out in goth nightclubs, and
Yeah.
sometimes they wear trench coats. It's sort of like, so to sort of have it a more sort of fleshed out underground crime organization kind of law is like, yeah, I think that's something that something that the sort of vampire fiction scene like needs.
And that's something I tried to incorporate actually a little bit through my character, Sinfael, who I love. He's just my little brat. Uh, he's very flamboyant and just, think like Loki, but as a vampire. Like that was kind of
All right,
the
cool.
the vibe I went for with Senpai a little bit because he's is neither good nor bad. But he's obviously not perfect, you know. And he owns a nightclub. He's very much involved in the human trafficking and prostitution era. Um,
Right.
uh, racket. There we go. Um, so each vampire kind of has their own different racket, and I wanted to kind of comment on the fact that there's, this underground blade, nightclub type thing, but Sunfalio does a little bit different. And he's very much a vampire that has resources, and you don't really know what his resources is, but you know that he's been here long enough to have those resources in that pool.
Sure.
Um, and so he'll definitely become more of a character in, I think, book two.
Okay.
But he's a lot of fun.
Cool. Cool. It's always good to have like characters that are like fun to
Yeah. The banter
you know
between him and
like
Lewin
fun.
are very much, and I created it very much in kind of a, brotherhood between the vampires, and maybe this might seem a little Lost Boys-ish, but Callum is a
Mm,
orphan from 19th century England,
sure.
and has been trying to look for his forever family, and he very much thought Stardust was building a family, and the
Hmm.
guy in
Hmm.
Stasi family. Um, and when they come over to America, when Lewin's a fresh-blooded vampire, Symphaio takes Lewin under his wing, and Callum very much sees Symphaio as a challenge to his family. He doesn't want to lose Lewin as his brother, so there's that dynamic of brotherhood, and just some sibling rivalry, and same way in which rivals and mafias would have and wanting to take each other out. So there's different layers to that.
Right.
This book is like an onion.
Okay. Cool. Yeah. I mean, I'm looking forward to sort of. I can already sort of picture like knowing what I know about Lewin and the way he conducts himself. I'm sort of like picturing that kind of character maybe being a bit of a foil, someone that he can like, kind of bounce off a bit. So,
Hmm.
yeah, I'm looking forward to getting to that part. So, let's bring the conversation full circle. So we talked about Twilight at the beginning. Um, we both grew up in the early to mid, was it? No, like mid to late 2000s kind of vampire revival
Hmm.
with Twilight and True Blood and that kind of thing. Um, how do you think that sort of period has shaped the sort of modern vampire lore? I mean, Eve. Recently, I just went to see Nosferatu,
Yes,
which is like a kind of like I loved it.
I loved it.
I thought it was really good. I think Robert Eggers is just he's
Anything he touches is gold.
he's great. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I'm so looking forward to this
He can touch the movie
Wolfman
rights to
movie.
this book all he wants. I can just say that right now.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, I'd love to see that. But yeah, that's a kind of like it's a very different kind of sort of like take on the whole kind of sexy vampire thing. I mean, so my sort of experience with Twilight was just from as I say, I kind of went through a kind of like, oh, I hate it, and then I was kind of like, oh, why do I hate it really?
Yeah.
And then I engaged with it. I watched the film. I didn't really like it very much. But it was more just kind of I didn't like hate it, but I more just kind of felt like I like my vampires to be a bit more. I think I was comparing it in my head to there's a movie called Let Me In,
Yes.
um, which I don't know if you've seen that, but that is about that's a kind of similar thing where it's kind of like the genders are reversed. It's about a girl or who you think is a girl vampire and a young boy, and it really kind of it really goes into, and it's a very different kind of story with a very different kind of audience, but it really goes into like the moral problems of if you were in love with a vampire, someone who needs to kill to survive, someone who is hundreds, maybe thousands of years old, effectively making it a bit iffy that they're in love with someone who is barely in their teens.
Right.
um and the you know and just all these kind of moral dilemmas that come with like a vampire romance. And I kind of felt like in Twilight, as I say, it's not aimed at me.
Yeah.
It's aimed at people who want to have this kind of fantasy of maybe it's a kind of an escapist fantasy. You might have a different
Well,
sort of perspective, but I think the thing that sort of the fact that they like drink animals' bloods
yeah.
to it's sort of like, well, they don't have to kill. It was humans then.
It
This has
lost.
just become me reviewing Twilight, which wasn't meant to be what the question was. But yeah,
Well, I think it's also because
thoughts.
we had, Bram Stoker's vampire. We had the one with Christopher Lee, the one with Gary Oldman, and then before that we had Dracula 2000 with Gerard Butler. Um,
Oh God, yeah, I remember that.
and
That
uh,
was
it was
terrible.
terrible, but we'd still watch it because it's like Gerard Butler as a vampire.
Yeah,
You can't say no to that.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay,
But
yeah.
it's just, I think the whole idea about vampirism that entices people is the whole entire idea of it resembles something of old tradition.
Mm,
And and gore. I think the fact that we all have seen gore beforehand and the vampires in Twilight did not necessarily live up to the gore because and so I think that's what's really shaped is like early 2000s vampires kind of more so shaped this than Twilight did. Because Twilight came
mm,
out when I was like 14 or
sure.
13 or like that. So it was like it was definitely the older, Anne Rice's Interview with a Vampire. We all saw Lestat on stage and fell in love with him. Uh,
Hmm.
and so I think it's more so the element of old tradition and the patriarchy in which women even my age still relish in the fact of getting married, and that's one of the highest achievements that they can still have these days aside from a career and bank account and all this other stuff. So I think it's just kind of a reflection of how far we've come, and this is still a tradition that we still value. And that's something that Dracula was trying to uphold, a covenant between him and his wife, and the fact that he made a deal with the
Mm-hmm.
devil, and in order to, you know, appease that covenant, he had to, become one with his other half. And so I think that's something that's been explored upon in many different vampire stories aside from my own and Twilight. The fact that
Mm-hmm.
Edward couldn't, fully live until Bella was a vampire without the Volturi coming after them. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's one thing I do a little bit different in mine is, yes, the whole entire covenant and bond between a vampire and mortal is there, but it's not as magical or as fulfilling, I think, as it's supposed to be.
All right. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I
It's
think
messier.
you know people expect this one thing to happen in their life and change everything. It's like no, it's you've
Yeah.
given meaning to that, and I think that's one thing a lot of uh women my age is like, they want this relationship with this person that they've elevated, and once it happens, nothing really changes. They don't
Right.
become, and vice versa for men. This one thing won't make the person become the person I need. And I think it's again
Mm-hmm.
going back to finding that person to save yourself.
Right. Yeah. No, that's a really good point.
Hmm.
I never, yeah, I guess I never really looked at those stories in that kind of way. I guess like there was just me as my sort of like male brain just sort of being like, oh, this is, you know, this is like gooey romance stuff. I don't know what that, but
There's a lot of different layers.
um,
It's like an onion.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I meant that specifically to Twilight, but
Yeah.
like I did, I watched Interview with the Vampire when I was a teenager, and I kind of liked it, I guess, but I never really.
If
Yeah, I need to. It's one of those ones I need to watch again, I think.
Watch that one and also watch the new one on Netflix because that one is pretty well done too.
Oh, all right,
It
cool.
was definitely they tied in the pandemic to it and everything, but I think it was well
Oh,
done. Uh, as far as I can go, my uncle was the biggest perpetuant of me reading Interview with the Vampire because that's his favorite
right.
vampire, and I think that was something I wanted to incorporate a lot of history and influence. So Anne Rice has had a big influence. Carmilla Sheridan Le Fanu, which was an original story that inspired Dracula.
Mm.
And so I wanted to go back to the lore and everything about, vampires and where it started. Not I didn't want to go to the Twilight Wave because, my vampires don't sparkle. They're actually pretty
That's
gruesome.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're pretty gruesome in the sunlight. You don't want to see them in the sunlight for too long. They get a little soggy. Uh, but it's one of those things of I wanted to keep to the original lore, and that was I think one thing that Twilight challenged, and I think a lot of people had critiques about was the fact that Edward sparkled, and I'm like, yeah, that
Yeah.
that in the movie that just didn't translate as well as it did in the book. Um,
Yeah.
I'm like, yes, I don't know how I feel if my man sparkled. Like,
That's
what
it.
what party did you go to that I wasn't invited to?
Well, that's it. Yeah. I remember like one of the most awkward. I don't know why this. Well, I do know why this has just come up in my brain because we were just talking about it. But I remember once I was at the like, and this was like about 5 years ago, and I was just at this house party that was just like really awkward, and it just fell into silence. And for some reason, just to like break the ice, I just sort of sat up and just went, "Guys, what if vampires do sparkle?" Because that was like a big thing for ages. Like that, you would just sort of
Like, how
hear
do
it
we
constantly.
know?
Vampires don't sparkle, and it's sort of like, oh, we just won't challenge that. I guess they don't. I've never seen one sparkle,
Yeah.
but then I've never seen like a vampire either. So,
Well,
like,
what I find now is that the same energy of hate that there was for Twilight is now being focused on Robert Eggers' Nosferatu. And my
wow,
question,
do you really think?
yeah, I have seen a lot of hate for it, and I'm just like, why? It was
Huh.
like really well done, and he took elements from both Dracula, Carmilla, the Jean-Pierre's vampire, or Pelosi the vampire. Like, there were different elements that Robert Eggers took from the original lore and added it in, and I think he did it beautifully. And there's a lot of criticism towards how Bill Skarsgård looked in as Count Orlok, which I'm like,
Oh man,
I
I
thought he looked
completely
terrifying, and I
disagree. I
loved it.
thought he stole the movie. In fact, it took me quite a while to work out. Oh, that's Pennywise.
Yeah.
That's the dude from who plays Pennywise and was in the beginning of Barbarian. That guy?
Yeah.
It's sort of like it's just unrecognizable.
Yeah, you couldn't tell it's him
man,
at all. Like, I've had to watch the makeup videos 100 times to be like, okay, that is Skarsgård. Okay, gotcha. But
Yeah.
it was beautifully haunting, and just I think it was just well done. And then that movie came out like right at the point I was finishing my book, and like it just was like that. Yeah, I was confirmation
nice.
I was doing something right in my book a little bit.
Oh,
So
awesome, cool.
it was something that I think we needed to see a new rendition of that story. And since with romance being booming, like it's selling like no tomorrow. And I never used to consider myself a romance writer or even a reader, in fact, and I blame that very much on my 2 booksellers at Barnes for corrupting me. Thank you. Uh, so but romance has become such a thing now. People are getting back into reading. Rebecca Yarros, Colleen Hoover, all these new authors that are hitting the shelves and just killing it. And I think I wanted to give a shot at a romance. Really was what it was. I was like, can I do this? Because I feel like a lot of what I write does have some kind of romantic element. And since a lot of my studies kind of focus on 19th century literature, I was like, okay, this is where I'm going.
Awesome, cool. Well, you've sort of mentioned a few authors there, just as a kind of like a final, maybe a little final segment before we wrap up.
Yeah.
Do you have any lesser known or underrated pieces of vampire or mafia crime media that you want to sort of give a shout out to, or might have inspired your writing?
I would definitely say Bryn Weaver and Scarlett St. Clair. There are 2 of my favorite contemporary romance, smutty romance authors that are out there, along with J. Rose. And also pretty much every original that vampire that's come out, Anne Rice we talked about, Sharon LaFanu. I'm very much a 19th century literature girl, so I very much was a Jane Eyre girl. It's my favorite.
Right.
So I wouldn't really say that there's anyone specifically, but it's a conglomerate of everyone that I've read,
Sure.
because I constantly read.
Well, I actually have this has just crossed my brain, and I haven't seen this film. Have you heard of a film called Byzantinium?
I've not.
Right, so it's by the guy that directed Interview with a Vampire.
Okay.
And it is his kind of spiritual, as a movie, follow-up to Interview with the Vampire, which is about a vampire-run brothel that, like, stays open for, like, hundreds of years and is run and managed by the same girls. And I always just thought that sounded like an amazing movie.
What is it called again?
I don't know anyone who's seen it. It's called Byzantinium.
Byzantinium. All right, I will have to check it out.
Yeah, and like I'm just sort of like, but I haven't seen it either. So it's just sort of like everyone asks me, "Oh, have you got any good like horror recommendations?"
I do.
It's like,
actually,
well,
since
this is one. Yeah, sorry, go on.
Since you brought up Nosferatu, so preceding that, when I was in college, there was this wonderful film I saw with a group of friends called Shadow of the Vampire. And it is...
Oh, with Willem Dafoe,
yes,
right?
So Willem Dafoe,
Yeah.
Carrie Elways, and Eddie Susie Ezard are all in that. And it's literally Willem Dafoe plays a vampire, pretending to be human, pretending to be a vampire, and they're making a movie pretty much about Nosferatu, and it's
right.
You can't tell if it's horror or comedy, at least for me, because I have a dark sense of humor. Uh,
Mm, mm, mm.
but
I only found out about that movie after I saw Nosferatu,
I definitely recommend watching
and
it. It's phenomenal.
oh yeah, I've got to go check that out
Yeah,
now. Cool. All right. Well, thank you,
of
Kirsten.
course.
That has been that has been a great that has been a great little chat. And yeah, everyone remember to buy Kirsten's book and subscribe or follow us on X, Twitter, and Blue Sky. So when I said Twitter, I meant Blue Sky. I sort of like I don't know which one's which anymore. But yeah, check out Kirsten's book, Blood Mist and Bonedust. There's going to be a link to it down below. And yeah, see you next time.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.